Hey guys, I just want to let you know that I'm now a certified spiritual life coach. If you resonate with the topics and lessons that my guests and I discuss on my podcast, and you feel that you could use some empowerment and direction in your journey of becoming who you truly are, consider booking a free discovery call with me on my website at kindlemccullough.com. And now on to the episode. Hey guys, I'm excited today. I have with me my friend Gavin Abeytratne, and I met him like a couple weeks ago. My friend that came on the podcast, Amanda, she knew of Gavin and this awesome new course he's putting together, the Integral Alchemy course. And I was like, does that have to do with spiral dynamics? And she's like, yes. And I was like, oh, that's great. I love spiral dynamics. It's actually like the longest episode, longest subject thing I wanted to talk about that I haven't talked about yet. So, yeah, thanks for coming on, Gavin, and doing this with me.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You want to give a little brief intro to like who you are?
Yeah, sure. Well, for all the spiritual types listening to this, I'm no one, I'm everything, I'm nothing. But yeah, I mean, jokes aside, yeah, I mean, where do I even start? I met Amanda through a mutual friend, Hannah. Hannah, a few years ago, came to me through a funnel I built online where I was helping, I guess you would call it like conscious entrepreneurs scale their businesses. Hannah came through and she runs a really cool business up in northern Queensland, which is like a recovery center that also blends like emotional work with health, which is obviously, you know, they're pretty intertwined. And yeah, basically after about a year of doing she came to just for business, but after working on business for a while, we started doing more and more deeper emotional work, more somatic work, more deconditioning work, all this kind of stuff. And that started to have a really positive impact on what was going on in the business and in her personal life, beyond even what was happening in just a strictly business context. And so I suppose, you know, it's a little rewind further than that. Probably for the last 10 years or so, I've been, for all intents and purposes, a marketing consultant. But I don't actually have a marketing degree. The only degree I had was in behavioral studies, where I sort of learned depth psychology and all this sort of Jungian-based stuff. And most of my career has been spent in the personal development world, at places like Mind Valley, which is, funnily enough, where I first saw spiral dynamics and heard about it. And basically behind the scenes of a lot of thought leaders and experts for a while, sort of moving between selling some of my own products, going behind the scenes, and moving then in and out of different worlds, including the not-for-profit sector and psychedelic-assisted therapy and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess like the context for spiral dynamics and the whole thing is that it's the first time I saw it, I was just like, oh, wow, there you go. I'm not a snowflake. I'm actually apparently just an archetype moving through like fairly predictable, layers. And I think when I first saw it, I was like, oh, okay, I think this is probably what's going to be what my life's work, or a big chunk of what my life's work will be. And this was 2015, so obviously a decade ago. And it sort of informed pretty much everything I've done ever since. And I've spent a very long time trying to understand it at deeper levels, the pros and cons and the nuances, and still learning.
Yeah, great intro. I love the model. I think there's a lot of truth to it. A lot of things we can learn. It's a great way to understand the world. But obviously there's some pitfalls as well, which we'll get into.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And so I think, the context of you sort of going through integral alchemy is, look, and full respect to the entire integral community and a lot of the people that did amazing work there. But I think, there are some alternative ways of maybe looking at those models and recontextualizing them to be useful in different ways. So that's kind of where integral alchemy landed on the scene.
Yeah, for sure. I want to start with Terrence McKenna quote, which I've used a lot before. The map is not the territory, and also all models are wrong, but some are useful. So it's just
Very good.
before we even begin, it's like it's all a generalization. So we don't want to get too caught up in it, and know that it's not going to portray reality exactly right, but it is a
Yes.
very useful model. So
Yes.
it's a psychological and sociological stages of development. You might actually know a little bit more than me as far as like kind of how it developed and came about. I think you said that it was like a language model.
Yeah. Well, it's super interesting actually because so as is classic with this whole integral world, our world generally, it's like in many ways we're the worst marketers, you know. Like so the original version of spiral dynamics, I think it was called the Cyclical Theory of Human Development, and it was just an article that was written by a guy called Claire de Graves. It was in the 70s, you know, like a long time ago, and it basically mapped these cycles of development. And the way that he I thought he was a girl for ages with the name Claire de Graves, you know.
Yeah.
But it's anyway, whatever. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. Claire, and it was built off sentence completion testing, which was basically listening to the language and the words people used, which then would sort of indicate clusters of values that they would be holding. So yeah, sentence completion testing is a really interesting research methodology. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I also heard that this guy named Sri Aurobindo in India kind of developed a similar system, or his system informs spiral dynamics. I don't know too much about that, but it's just interesting to see that.
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, you're absolutely spot on. And so Sri Aurobindo was the first one, I think, who used the term integral maybe in the West to connote this sort of spirit matter dichotomy and reconciling heaven and earth and all this kind of stuff. One of them. I mean, how do you really make these claims, right? First person in the West, what does that mean? The Atlanteans are going to come at me and be like, hey, bro, you missed my history. So he was certainly one of them. And I think it sort of speaks to something which is maybe quite foundational. It's that some of these models appear to be observed, not created. You know what I mean? Like they're almost discovered, not created, because you're kind of just looking at you're just noticing natural patterns. And if you look at how AI is built, which is in itself a language model, which is basically a giant pattern recognition model, you know, you can kind of see how some of these things are almost emergent phenomena of inner worlds and outer worlds interacting, and raw materials just sort of interacting with each other. So, yeah, TLDR, I think that's kind of the initial version of it. And then I think it was Beck and Cowan, and then Wilbur eventually came in as well. Ken Wilbur came in, and it became spiral dynamics. And I think they added the colors to it and maybe even made it a spiral. But it was basically, I think in the earlier stages, almost like an alternative or a parallel model to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sort of mapping what I suppose is interesting about spiral dynamics is that it maps collective evolution, not just individual evolution as well, which is quite an interesting use case for it.
Right. Yeah, I like the parallel, the psychological and the sociological, and showing how it's in both. And like you were saying, it's observed. And what's really cool about your course, and what I've noticed too, is how spiral dynamics relates to so many different things, whether it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or chakras, or psychological stages of development, or even like stages of faith. Different people have come up with these different things, and you can make so many parallels. So it's really, really cool.
Oh, well, we used it in marketing. I certainly used it in marketing a lot because those value systems really inform how entire clusters or groups of people literally value things. And so, you know, if you try to make a value proposition, it can be quite useful to frame it in the sense-making modality or sense-making worldview that someone is with a dominant way of, you know, approaching the world sort of sits.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to start saying every stage has pros and cons, and no stage is better than another. And the goal is to learn and stay in each stage as long as needed, and then move to another stage, but keep the positive lessons from the previous stage. While at the same time realizing that we all have different parts. So if you think about like IFS and parts work, we have different parts, and every stage. So it's not like you just leave one stage, but I think you can develop an understanding of more and more stages as you get older. And then stages cycle from individualistic to collectivist. So like stage 1 is individualistic, stage 2 is collectivist, and then repeating. And then also, which is interesting, each stage needs advisors or authority figures of the past stage in order to cement the next stage. And so, yeah, it's so funny that so many people have developed or talked about this or written their versions. So there's different, you could call them colors or different words that they've named each stage. So it's different. So it can be a little frustrating talking about it. But when you discuss each stage, then you can see how they're very similar, no matter who's talking about them. So stage 1, I would say, is like survival. I like to think about like history, like cavemen, and it's individual. And yeah, Gavin, you want to jump in and say more about stage 1?
You mean beige?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To use the color. Yeah, well, beige is, I guess the other sort of context of this is the other sort of expert in the house for this is my wife, who's studying early childhood development, and they go through a lot of developmental models. And so the beige stage in spiral dynamics, as I understand it, correlates with basically the sort of mapping it to age ranges is quite interesting. It can be easy to sort of contextualize it. It maps to sort of 0 to 1-ish, where an organism doesn't necessarily have, or a human or whatever it is just kind of operating on a pure somatic basis, just sort of a purely sensory basis. This is precognitive, pre-language, pre-verbal. I think potentially even before object permanence and sort of episodic memory and all that stuff kick online. So you're basically looking at the sort of really base and fundamental core elements of an organism in terms of its development. Yeah.
Yeah, right. They haven't really like developed an ego to even like see that they're separate. But they're just trying to survive. There's just
that's why it's so funny, because there's this thing, and we'll put a pin in this for later because it's hilarious. There's something called a pre-trans fallacy, and this is some of maybe the great irony of this sort of hermetic principle, even that extremes meet, because it's like the most base and rudimentary level of human consciousness of just like, I can't even tell that I'm separate from anything else. I don't even have an ego, is identical in many ways, not identical, but has similar characteristics to quote unquote the highest level of human consciousness, where ego also dissolves, right? So there's this kind of funny situation there where it's like you can regress into a total dissolution of the boundaries between self and other, which is like how a newborn interacts with the world. And you can also get that in a heightened stage, and you can get confused between the two, or hell, maybe they're both more similar than we all know. So, who knows?
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. It's really funny.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on. I think that there's, hopefully, I think when people first have like a oneness experience, and maybe have an experience of the high stage of consciousness, or like I would say state of consciousness of oneness, you can get lost in just oneness. But I think once you come back down to earth, it's like you include and transcend. So you realize that there's, and to some degree we are separate, but to some degree we're not separate. So then you can kind of see like both sides of it, and hopefully you can develop and see that and live that out. And I think that's a ever growing process of learning how to do that.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Yeah. So stage 2 is tribal, magical. I would say like Native Americans or any indigenous clan or tribe. and they see the world as like kind of enchanted, um, and values ritual and deep community. Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
want
well,
to add?
this is another interesting one where it's like, yeah, there's certainly elements of the um, magic and ritual in there, but and this is probably true also for the Australian Indigenous Aborigines as well. But there's this great book I read by an Indigenous scholar in Australia called Tyson Yunka Porter, and as he was describing sort of Indigenous thinking, it actually sounded a lot closer to turquoise than it did to purple. To be honest with you, because yeah, there's definitely some of the mythic and mythopoetic structures for understanding the world, but a lot of it sounded, yeah, very. There's a lot of systems thinking there, a lot of quite integral thought. So it's again, this is why, to be entirely blunt with you, some of the so in integral alchemy, I did propose a model that was sort of an alternative to spiral dynamics for almost this exact reason, because it's. I mean, there's absolutely grains of truth in that, but it's almost like that these stages or the descriptions of the stages don't inherently encompass what is really going on there, because there's elements of animism and panpsychism that can start to occur in those purple stages, which might actually be higher expressions of unity consciousness, not just like, you know what I mean? So it's a little complex when you start looking at it, especially at the collective, at the level. It's like in many ways it's almost easier to map these to human individual development, because you can kind of see how that's playing out with like an individual child. But when you're looking at entire cultures and civilizations, it's very challenging to map it to a specific, specific group. So I don't know enough about Indigenous or Native American culture to really make that claim. But I certainly had a bit of a call it even a rude awakening when I was like, oh, actually, it was certainly with Indigenous Australians, there might be quite a lot more going on here than spiral dynamics would suggest, and that most people really would understand. And I could be wrong on that one, but it's certainly where my current thinking is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's always the whatever culture you're in, whatever stage is popular where you're at, you have this belief that it's like superior, better, whatever. But that's why I kind of gave the thing at the end, at the beginning, that no stage is better than the other. We need all of it, and yeah, it's every stage and every group that you can tie it to is going to be more complex than what you might originally think or say.
Yeah, and sure. You're a great guy to have this conversation with.
Yeah, I've heard that this.
Oh, well, because I think, you obviously have come through the Integral Alchemy starter kit, and you can kind of see why even in us two, like, pretty seasoned guys trying to talk about this model, it's like it kind of, the vision logic of it almost in terms of just the hierarchical nature, it's just very challenging to see it like that. So like you said, it's like I've sort of conceptualized these as almost parts within a psyche rather than stages, although they are stages, but it's just, in my experience, actually doing this kind of work one-on-one with people, you almost never meet someone with a really like strong gravity in just one stage, or you do, but it's very clear that there's other parts that are repressed or active. Very clear, even if they're in the shadow, they might come out in shadow ways. It happens all the time, and specifically in shadows. And it's like, it's particularly that magic animistic part where, to be entirely blunt with you, I feel as though the suppression of that in sort of the Western scientific paradigm has just blown out into us almost looking for certainty in areas where we can't get certainty, which I think 100 years from now, people will be like, those guys might as well have been like doing rain dances, because they're so wildly inaccurate with some of their predictions about what the future was going to be. I mean, you even look at like financial modeling or all that kind of stuff. It's like just wildly inaccurate a lot of the time for people. And yet there's this almost like desire to have like this, no, someone has to be able to be the oracle of the future, and I'm just going to like rationalize that this person or this class of people can like predict the future for me just because I like have this strong desire for certainty. And it kind of gets viewed or rationalized through like an orange rational scientific lens. But it's like, if you actually sense check that against how accurate are these models, or are these like predictions, like they're just not You know what I mean? So it's like, and yet people still persist in it. So it's like, in many ways, like this is sort of like rationalized fortune telling. You know what I mean? And I have a feeling that, come on, 50, 100 years from now, we'll look back and be like, what were these guys thinking? Just denying their need for an oracle in an uncertain world, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm, as we flesh this out more, we'll get more into all that. I've also heard a lot that the postmodern or green can often be compared to this stage as well. People get more the re-enchantment back into the world after the modern, the rationality, and get back to the magic and trying to figure out like what is whatever we might say superstition or like just kind of we've learned from that, and then what is something that we've lost that is true from that stage.
Yeah, and if it isn't true, maybe it's beautiful, and maybe that's good enough.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So stage 3, I would say, is like warrior. It's power, egocentric. It's aggressive, impulsive, ruthless. I think a good comparison is like Genghis Khan. So it's like going from tribal to kind of this like warrior leader that people really look up to and follow, and they like take over nations or tribes or stuff like that. And it's not all bad. We need to like be in our power and be courageous and that as well. But I think often people will really see the negative side of the stage.
Yeah, well, so this tracks developmentally for an individual to ages of 3 to 6, which is where if you've got kids, you'll see them. They become the called the high chair tyrant or the toddler tyrant, and it's a stage of natural developmental stage. It's good. Well, in some ways, it's called developmental narcissism. It's like primary narcissism comes online at this stage. That's another word that gets thrown around a lot. Narcissism, everyone's a narcissist, but it's like as opposed, there's like pathological narcissism, and then there's kind of like the sort of inherent self-interest that almost all organisms have to have at some stage in their life in a dominant way and through most parts of their life to be kind of functional. And so, that sort of shows up with red or stage 3. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's negatives and positives to it. And it's like all about learning how to use that power in a good way.
Absolutely.
So the next stage is traditional. I think of like Middle Ages, politics, government, church. It's about values, discipline, faith or order, and transcendent God over everything else. Socially conservative.
Yep. Do you mean that's that?
Yeah. If you have something to add.
Well, I think a really good way to, again, I've been sort of, I started looking at this stuff really in the big collective, and then in the last like maybe year or two, I've really taken it down into, I guess, organizational stuff, family stuff, and now it's like I'm seeing it with my like 3-year-old. Like that. This is where I'm like referencing it to, because you can absolutely see it to the ages and stages. Well, that's a good one too. I should say, like stages of like medieval and whatnot, but it's very hard to really understand it until you see it as like an individual. I think my main takeaway, I suppose, from this, if we really want to get into it, it's like collective evolution is just individual evolution at scale. You know what I mean? Like there is no really such thing as society. So everything about social change and all this kind of stuff, it's like society is just the emergent function of an aggregation of individuals. So it's like you kind of can't do social change without individual change, and you kind of can't do individual change without just like really looking at the individuals in it. So I'll keep bringing this back to like, and this is good for us to move between these polarities because, whatever extremes meet and all that comedic fun stuff. So, basically what you see is like the hard shell tyrant, the 3 or 4-year-old that just wants everything their way, will throw a tantrum, eventually comes to the conclusion that like they can't overpower everyone all of the time. And if they really want to get their needs met, they need to start delaying gratification and they need to start coming to order, because otherwise it's just too much chaos. Because it's all well and good when you're the biggest kid in the playground until some other big kid comes along, right? So it's like in my daughter's case, she's bigger than her 1-year-old sister, but then she goes to kindergarten, some of the 4-year-olds there, can bop her. And now all of a sudden they want rules and regulations and order so that they can have the sense of safety as well, right? So it's like this zero-sum dynamic of like, let's just all, fight it out, eventually becomes so tiresome that you're like, well, let's just create some order, structure, dogma so we can, have some collectivism. And I suppose if you now want to take to medieval, it's like, yeah, you can see how that would have evolved, right? You get a bunch of tribes, they're all just sort of warring with each other. And then one day they're like, hey guys, like we're on the same land. Can we just stop like killing each other so we can get some good night's sleep? And maybe we just like band together and maybe find someone else to kill. You know what I mean? And so it's like you start to just harmonize and create some then order and structure. And then you're right, this is kind of where the kingdoms really come into it. And you can, there's a bit Game of Thronesy where you're basically always straddling between this tension between red and blue, because you're still using power in service of that order and structure. It's not like you really get rid of it. It's just in many ways channeled through a more narrow aperture or focused, or you can sort of choose when you're using that power, not be using it all the time.
Yeah, I like the good point. I should have done this earlier as far as like explaining why people would want to evolve to the next stage and see the importance of it. While still seeing the importance of the previous stages. And obviously from stage 1, survival, individual, to just being in a tribe, just having other people, having support, having community, and looking out for each other.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
And that can be limited too, because that type of tribe, you think a very small group of people. And so the warrior kind of like bands a bigger group together under one powerful individual. But again, like you said, that just who has the biggest stick, who has the most power, always like fighting, always like looking over your shoulder. Eventually you see the limits of that. And so you get into that traditional, and that's where we probably see the start of like countries develop, bigger groups of people and having more order and,
Yeah, absolutely. Then that's a great analogy. And this is what I mean when it's like I had a big shadow, and I use the word shadow as in like, let's just call it blind spot in the beige and purple areas until really the last few years. And like I said, I first saw Spider-Man in 2015, so it's been a long learning lesson for me. And one of my friends and business colleagues, she was just like, "Yo, dude, you got to look into that purple area. There's a lot more going on there." And I was like, "Oh, okay, there's a lot going on there." But yeah, even patriarchy is in purple. It's pater familias. That's what comes from there. And so you can almost see this individuation tendency of like, okay, cool, being a part of a tribe is great and it's good for survival. But like, what if I have needs and wants and beliefs and values and desires that are outside of my tribe, right? This is why you'll get people still needing to change tribes or to find new cultures to belong in. And that kind of happens through that purple-red transition. In many ways, it's a constant ongoing process for people as they evolve and maybe out-evolve their own communities that they're in,
Yeah, absolutely. I think many of us who've kind of gone through, you could call deconstruction from our faith that we grew up with, have a lot of shadow with this stage, and you have work to do to reconcile with that and understand the importance and the positive side as well. So yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. And I think that's a shadow in the integral community or in the integral space overall, because I was, it's like, it's very easy to turn your nose down at this mythopoetic thing and like these, not you personally, but like one, like just these, these silly stories. But it's like stories are so powerful, they're like the most enduring sense-making tool we have. And, I find that in the final analysis, it all kind of collapses back into story anyway, just from a sense-making perspective. So, not having really powerful myths can kind of create a bit more nihilism than is pragmatic. my 2 cents.
Yeah. You have a really good graph, and that really shows like this stage is a very grounded stage, and it's kind of like it's order, right? So we need to build on other stages. You really need this stage to help ground you and help make something else, and that's where stage 5 comes in, modern, rationalistic. I would say that you could really see this come into history with like the Enlightenment, rationality, invention, science, and I would maybe say like America really brought this into the collective, like establishing it in government in a country.
Yeah, I mean, a grand experiment in liberty, right? There you go. There you go. Yeah, I mean, I was listening to one of Wilbur's books recently on that, and I can't remember. I do find it hard to track some of these things across cultures. I think he said something around it started in the 1600 Enlightenment era, and it started with Kepler and science. But I think, in terms of a full, undoubtedly the U.S. Constitution and the American Revolution was a very significant, very, very, very significant milestone in, I suppose, the dominance of an orange worldview. That's for sure. If you could call that, if it is indeed orange,
right, going from like kings to government and like a democratic kind of thing. Very individualistic, self-reliant, innovation, that type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, look, for what it's worth, and again, I might be like the prior of the integral movement at this point, but it's like I think there's actually a lot of yellow in the American Constitution as well. To be honest with you, there's a lot of systems thinking in it. To me, it looks very much like a decentralized organizational structure, just in terms of how the states were essentially designed to run as like semi-autonomous units within a broader system. It's like, I mean, potentially there's an orange element to that too, but it's like I think there's glimpses of yellow in that as well, and it's like that's obviously contextualize that with, of course, the ethics things that we would not be down with today, and at the same time also acknowledge that same constitution evolved into something that could fix its own ethical transgressions to some extent, at least systemically, at least start to, So it's like I think there's a lot to be said for looking at that with a bit more hope, optimism, gratitude than maybe currently.
That's a great point, and we'll get into that stage soon, shortly. But you're right; it has a lot of complexity and nuance and dynamic flexibility, you might say.
Yeah.
I took a constitutional law class. I actually really enjoyed it because we talked about kind of like static versus changing constitution, and there's different cases, and people are always arguing about that. It was meant to be the same or evolve with the country, and how does that come about? And really interesting. So kind of dealt with these same type of questions and stages, dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah, then stage 6 is postmodern. Think of like hippies. Think of like even psychology, understanding individual views or relativism or like your unique perspective. It becomes more like civil rights, environmentalism, world-centric.
Yep. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. In many ways, green value system, I guess, would you call it, level 6? Yeah. It could be also known as the chasm because it's very hard to fully operate in green. That's almost where you get a little liminal, a little voidy, because it tends to be more deconstructive than constructive, and it has a very natural function. And it's like it almost needs to that one kind of people. So I found this very liberating to hear because I bounced around green quite a lot, to be honest with you. because identifying a problem is halfway to solving it, but it doesn't actually solve it. So it's like, unless there's a new solution proposed, you're like, okay, cool. I don't like the 9 to 5. For me, right? I didn't like I was a law school dropout, so we can get into that. But it's like, I didn't like these things, but like not knowing what I didn't like didn't create like what I did like. It just sort of created a void, and that's a beautiful thing. But green will tend to then collapse back into something or transcend. And often, if you can't create something new, it'll just sort of collapse back into blue, because at least there's some safety and order and rules here, which is why you'll have a lot of like people with blue-green gravity. This is sort of the therapists, and will have very blue-green energy a lot of the time, because it's like, well, I've got these green values. I'm just going to move into a, unionized, regulated, clear, job, and I'll play within that system. And then there's an element of like being frustrated by that system, but there's also like a pragmatism of like, well, this is the only system that can really support me, and that's the best we've got as well. So that blue-green tendency is a double collective, right? To use your initial phrasing of it, of like individual collective. It's like, and this is kind of more how in practice these stages show up. It's like, it's almost like a chord progression where you'll get like a double, get some good blue-green energy, and then the real social justice warriors and the activists, and I was certainly playing one at one point, they've got like green-red energy, right? Where it's just like, I'm going to go make change because I'm pissed off about the way the world is, but I'm doing it with force, right? And so that's what that sort of power for good, one's conception of good really comes into it. So, so yeah, that's green.
Yeah, I see so much of Christians and deconstructed Christians and religious people work around these dynamics. I would say stage 6 postmodern is very deconstruction and seeing the problems in religion, but then they don't have a value system. So then it's just like my perspective. So then it's like, how do I advocate for my perspective? Then it goes back into that power and order. They call them like angry greens a lot of times, very angry at the religion, and they become basically like the same thing, very dualistic, and just like, I'm seeing myself, my identity is in being against this other identity that I used to be, but you really haven't come into your own identity at all. And so you haven't developed like new, deeper values or ways of functioning or dynamics that can anchor, like you're saying. And so it really collapses back into previous ones. But that's why integral or spiral dynamics is so awesome, because it can show a way forward for a lot of these people. And certainly I was there myself, and a better way forward.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So stage 7 is integrative. I would say that it's kind of like it's starting to come online now more. I see like business leaders, spiritual leaders, and of course, like you said, there was people and there was elements of it that were placed in the past, but I think it's starting to become a bigger thing, and more people are starting to at least see from that perspective. It's kind of like, I would say, like a meta. It's a second layer of spiral dynamics, and seeing the systems and the patterns behind society, and also individual level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the transition from green to yellow is moving from the first tier to the second tier, and the key distinction between first tier and second tier is that in all of the first tier systems, you think your value system is the best one, or like kind of the only one, mostly. Even green is like, no, relativism is the only way. Like, we have to be, it's like dogmatically relativistic to the point where you almost get into this sort of hyper-subjectivity where it's like almost impossible to make any decisions, which is one of the pitfalls of green. And then often green needs to reintegrate orange and red, which brings on discernment, typically. And that discernment lets you say, yeah, everything has validity, but some things are more valid and practical than others. And certainly I'm going to make a choice to do a certain thing or be a certain thing. And it's okay that if everyone doesn't agree with me, that's fine. You're sort of willing to, in many ways, draw a line in the sand, which is kind of necessary even for causes that you really care about. Because if you start moving outside of your own bubble, you're definitely going to find people that disagree with you on things, even if you think it's a good idea, right? So it's like if you're trying to please everyone, you please no one ultimately, or you just stay in a little bubble, which is often where green just is like, screw this, I'm out. I'm peacing out to the, and I did this for years, right? I just moved to the seaside, had a cat, just like, well, not really interested in changing the world until I got a little bit thing. But yeah, so ultimately then yellow tier, second tier, integral tier, whatever you want to call it, comes online where you're like, oh, actually, now the meta perspective of seeing that all of these parts having some values and some value comes online. And when I was working with Jamie Wheel, who wrote Stealing Fire, and it was actually he's a strong integral thinker as well. He doesn't really talk about it that much, but it still informs what he does. He mentions something called adaptive leadership at this point, where you're kind of not necessarily trying to blow everything up and disrupt, but you're sort of really just sort of adaptively leading things and gradually evolving things to the next transition. And that was quite formative in my my worldview as well.
Yeah, definitely. Great addition. I would say that like where the rational level is kind of like our values. It's very like material based. I would say, and then postmodern is kind of like there is no absolute truth. And then integrative recognizes there is maybe this absolute truth, but it's beyond, it's like transrational. It's beyond our mind. It's beyond the physical. Maybe this like quantum or energetic sort of level. So it's very complex and it's amazing and it's great. It's important. We need it. And it can get so complex that it can collapse as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Because it's like, you kind of, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And so the yellow stage is like, you can kind of function there quite well, I find. I think I came from the consulting world, and a lot of consultants are there, to be honest with you. There's the systems thinkers, people who operate between multiple organizations, people who can kind of operate across different cultures. Basically, when you start to see lots of different systems all at once, and you kind of say, yeah, I kind of see where they're coming from, like in simple terms, without getting too triggered about the whole situation. That's kind of that yellow meme, and it's quite functional. I think a lot of people who are thinking at this stage will, tend to do well in those sorts of roles. You can stay there for a while, especially if you do your shadow work.
Yeah, they're definitely. It's very like people that are in this are like a lot of them are leaders.
Well, because if you think about it, like yellow tier is the context of a. Sorry about this, there's a delay on this. It's a bit there. Go for it. You tell me.
All good. Oh yeah, you go ahead and finish what you were saying.
Oh well, it's like if you're the CEO of an organization, to bring it back down to something like quite, maybe a bit more relatable than just the civilization level things. It's like, you'll have an accounting team which might be more risk averse and more orderly, which is blue. You might have a sales team which is more like, screw it, let's do it, let's just make some calls, which is red. You might have a marketing team which is quite analytical and needing to look at things and map, make plans and strategies and measurements, very orange. You might have a corporate social responsibility team that is very green, very sensitive to that. You might have people in culture which really care about tribe and community and connection, very purple. You know what I mean? So it's like all of these various subsystems exist within any organization, and they of course also exist within any psyche. And so it's like a psyche is just an organization is just like a deconstructed human psyche with each of the parts being played by different characters, and it's like you see that, you kind of see that all the time, even in TV shows, really. It's like, in many ways, when you watch a TV show, it's like you're watching parts within your own psyche embodied in different characters playing out. Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever, it's like the disintegrated masculine aspect shows up in Spike and Angel. You got the passionate lover Spike, you got the stoic Angel, and it's like, they're ultimately you're looking at one psyche at the end of the day. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that it's. I really like the verse in the Bible talking about or the chapter talking about like the parts of the body and how we need all parts of the body. And that also is an image of like the individual and the collective. Like obviously as an individual, I need every part of my body. It's all important. And as a collective, I need people that have focuses in all these different areas so that we can remain like balanced and get the important parts of all of every stage. But I think that when you start to realize stage 7, when you start to see from this perspective, then it helps you reconcile and be okay with every stage and learn how to kind of be a bridge or like a peacemaker and be like, okay, here's I see your perspective and I see what's important about that, but also here's these other people and what they have to say and what's important about that and maybe the pitfalls, and so you kind of help create this gel and help make it work.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear more about you're taking it through a Christian lens and how you're bringing that to it. That's super interesting.
Yeah. There's a couple. It depends on the person. There's other stages, and some people say there's not other stages, but there's one stage for sure. And really, I don't know if so much as a stage is more like a state of consciousness, which is just like those oneness. This not even just world. You might say stage 7 integral is kind of like this world centric, but oneness is like universal, and just seeing how we're all connected. And a lot of mystics or monks, gurus, spiritual people have really understood this and had this experience and kind of tried to bring this to the collective. And you can see it in the writings and the way it's affected people, but then obviously a lot of times the people who follow these mystics often don't understand this, and then they interpret it through their own level, their own lens.
Yeah.
It kind of gets diluted.
Yeah. Or it just gives them the right to amplify their own, red mean shadows of claiming divine right of kings, whatever.
Yeah, that's another thing is, a lot of people have had these experiences. I've had an experience of oneness, but then it can often, be filtered through the ego and then be like, oh, I'm the divine person, or I'm God, or I'm Jesus, or whatever, and then kind of lose that the juice, what's really good about that level, and kind of go back down into egocentrism. So
well, it's certainly tough to play at that level, that's for sure. But there's a lot of beauty in those unity states as well. So yeah, I think you're spot on. So this is where I think there was even some tension between Wilbur and Cowan and Beck between like what really happened at these stages, because I worked with a guy called Dr. Jeffrey Martin who studied basically all of the Enlightenment states of consciousness, and and there's actually an interesting guy on YouTube called Leo Gura who talks about spiral dynamics and does a pretty good breakdown of all the levels. And I think he had to even take his turquoise level video down, but you can still find it. And he said some very interesting stuff. I mean, I'm certainly not endorsing everything that he says. I don't have the wherewithal to do it. But he basically came out and said that like 99% of human development happens at turquoise and above. And you go into like, well, not even human development, but like spiritual development. And there's like crazy levels of states of consciousness. And my former client and mentor friend, Jeffrey, he tracked like, I swear it was like 30 different locations of consciousness in turquoise alone, right? Like moving along the spectrum of consciousness. Some were dual, some were non-dual, some were like Christian mystics, some were like Sufi, some were like, it was nuts. I think, I don't think I ever got beyond like 4 or something. Like I just stayed around there. And he ultimately even concluded that like, he was like, oh, honestly, I usually just stay in level 1 or level 2. That's like the only place you can really operate a business from, and live a normal life. And then there was, within these states of consciousness, there was even depth of the layers as well. So there's a lot in there. And it hasn't really been studied that well. I think Jeffrey's the only guy that's really studied in that much detail. And he mapped it onto basically 2 parts. One was called the path of humanity. The other was like the path of liberation, or the path of freedom. And this is where you get into like, very non-symbolic things, hard to describe in words. I think you basically just have to move into direct experience, but you're really dematerializing at this point, or knocking yourself out of like, waking state consciousness.
Yeah, I think I've actually seen those YouTube videos, and he had like, I don't know, 5, 6 different levels, and like you said, there can be so many different experiences and so many different levels within those of these kind of spiritual experiences, and you don't see this in the collective. A collective group, at least that we know of in history, hasn't really like, or maybe it's just you can't even like hardly talk about them, like you said, because they're so non-dual, and so it's hard to talk about them, and it's more just like, hey, here's practices, here's things you could do to try to get you to have these experiences, but also like if you start trying to force them, then that's probably not going to work either. So it's a very surrender, experiential type of thing, and it's almost like what's the point of even talking about it? Like it's not going to really help you unless you just experience it yourself.
Well, to the point around language, and noticing some of these in the language patterns, our mutual friend Amanda has absolutely hit some of these states, and you can see it in her writing, because like her Instagram is just a hilarious indicator of someone who's very clearly hit or in, or at the very least very good at writing that way. Because hang on, let me find it. It's basically very like things stop being like a versus, you know, like they stop being this versus that, and they become this is that. Like the pattern recognition is very strong with her. She said some stuff where I was just like, whatever you're doing, you certainly hit some of these states and stages of development for sure. Hang on, let me see.
Yeah, she's been doing a lot of poetry, and I think poetry is like one portal to really get into like non-dual and not just this versus that or black and white.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think it was meaningful, extraordinary, shameless. Yeah, she's seeing a lot. It's quite interesting. Through poetry, that's such an interesting way to get there. Yeah, presence, presence. I remember having a conversation with her. It was probably, I think it was about polyamory or something like that. And then it was something around like, it wasn't polyamory because it was same spirit animating different matter, but it was the same spirit. You know what I mean? So it was like technically not multi. It was something to that effect. I think she's got a post on. I just saw a post on polyamory here. But yeah, there's something that she was saying, which you're like, okay, this person's clearly hitting some non-dual states where things become it's kind of like you said. It's where the polarities start to collapse, where extremes start to meet, and where you don't necessarily look at things as being this or that. You look at it as like spectrums of the same behavior within a singular. Locations of behavior within a singular spectrum, and you start to identify more with the thing that is witnessing the spectrum rather than the spectrum itself.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So they tell me. So Amanda's Instagram suggests. But yeah, that's ultimately what integral alchemy as a practice is designed to start to bring someone towards. So there's obviously we've sort of broken it into philosophy, practice, and then training, which, funnily enough, I didn't even realize, but like very closely mirrors the 3 jewels of Buddhism, however they call it, which is like you've got the philosophy, the practice, and then the exemplar, which is like showing up as someone who's in this state, so you can, to some extent, try and bring people into it with some coherence. But yeah, and it basically just involves, in simple terms, like deep somatic awareness and non-reactivity, so that you can start to notice both that the sensations in you aren't you, right? That you don't have to be triggered by your own sensations and compulsions and desires per se. You certainly can, but you don't have to be. And then as you start to do that, you notice that even the judgments and views and thoughts that are arising from you aren't you, right? So you would stop identifying as a this or a that, but you could just sort of see these as emergent phenomena from within a awareness system. And this is where you can sort of be a bit more adaptive, where you can sort of, oh yeah, this appears to be useful here or not useful there. And the danger of hitting this place is you can get quite nihilistic because, in the relativism right? Where it's just like, oh, if you can be both this and both that, then who cares? It's all nothing, and it's all, And so there's almost then a conscious descent back to duality, like let's go back from non-dual to dual, but you're choosing the duality that you want to play into, choosing the identity and ego structure you want to play into, rather than just sort of having it, forced upon you,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've had a lot of episodes talking about like somatics and parts work and that type of thing, and that's what I love about spiral dynamics. It's the ladder. It goes from dual to non-dual, so you can not get lost in one or the other, but hopefully see both sides of it. And the somatic work can help you see, oh, there's a part of me that's over here in red. There's a part of me that's in purple, and here's what they're doing, and I can see the pattern in myself, and I can see the pattern in history, and I can see my aversion or my attraction to certain areas. And so knowing that my aversion shows me what I need to work on, and my love shows me what I might be blind to, negative sides to that, and somatics just help us get to the nonverbal, because trauma is often experienced when we're really young, before we have verbal language, and it helps us get clear in every stage, you could say, or at least attempt. We're on the process of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well said. And I think there's also something to be said just for the heightened sensory acuity of it's just like, just as you increase your senses, you just sort of notice the spirit in matter. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like this sort of classical spirit matter dichotomy, is that like, it's kind of strange if you think about it, that like matter isn't spirit, that there is some sort of inherent disconnect between the two. And usually what happens in, those sorts of really embodied immanence-based practices is you start to see, I don't know, whatever you can call it, God, spirit, universe, in matter itself. It's like not really trying to escape it. You sort of see it in the universe itself. And this is really fascinating, because it's like, yeah, I mean, even my wife's kindergarten teaching, they were saying like, yeah, having children play outside is a really interesting thing, because they start to notice patterns in nature. And it's like there's this real spiritual element of like seeing these natural, I mean, where are the spirals mostly, right? You want to talk about spirals, it's like they're in the flower of life. It's an actual flower, It's like it's in the dancing of the bees and all of that beautiful stuff, So, definitely the pathway through the body is in many ways it's certainly my pathway, the one I like to choose, like transcendence through immanence, if you will.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, they start out their journeys really focusing externally, or what they want to achieve in life and what they want to do. And as you get older, you realize that so much of the journey, and even to get to what we want externally, you have to go inwards and really work on yourself. And to see the patterns. I always love those pictures, seeing like lightning and then like your veins next to each other, and seeing how they look the same, and so many different things, like the hermetic principle, inner, outer. Patterns repeat. And then something like spiral dynamics, I love anything that can help illuminate the patterns even more. And I think that reading about that then gives me an experience in my body of the oneness in the universe, and it's just it's amazing. I love it. And then just trying to continue to keep that perspective, and like a child throughout the day, throughout every moment, and it makes the world alive, and there's always more to learn and more to grow, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah. Well, is there anything more that you wanted to say about this in like relation to yourself?
Yeah, I think these maps and models are really good for just having a bit of an integration framework in your own mind for broad strokes, noticing where you might be having a pattern. or a projection or a shadow or a judgment, and then realizing, oh, okay, this probably represents a cluster of, this is probably an indicator of not just one projection or judgment, but maybe potentially an entire cluster of values that I need to integrate, right? And so if people don't like myself, I'll use myself as an example, if I don't like planning or order or structure or something like that, then I'm like, oh, okay. And this shows up as me getting triggered by someone wanting a lot of details or information before we start something, for example. Then I'm like, oh, okay, this is maybe a bit of a shadow in blue meme, and what is this indicating that I also need to fix, which might be a whole myriad of things, which is sort of led me down to that, right? Or some people don't like scientific materialism or science or rationalism, then it might be an interesting indicator of shadows to look at generally. So I think spiral dynamics, so I have a 8S stack, and stages of development, and spiral dynamics as a sort of model sits on the first S. Then, as you know, we go into shadow, and this kind of map and model really lets you see where you have some shadows, right? Like, okay, I've got shadow in green, I've got shadow in blue, I've got shadow in red. I don't like being assertive or dominant. So it kind of helps contextualize some of the shadow, and then looking into how that affects things socially, or how that might have came about socially, digging into the somatic, into the state, into sexuality, into story, and into spirit, ultimately then provides a really good map and model for just kind of breaking yourself up into chunks so you can sort of look at yourself through some insight lenses. And that, I feel, is a really nice sort of intellectual grounding to have, because then when you start doing this altered state-based work, whether it's somatic or transcendent-based stuff, you can kind of land a little bit better. And those insights that you have in this state-based work can kind of land and be like, oh, okay, that's an interesting insight. And it can kind of contextualize itself and help sense make the whole experience. Otherwise, to use the alchemy phrase, it's like it's quite easy to dissolve an ego, but it's relatively hard to put it back together. And alchemy is, solve a coagula, which is dissolve and recoagulate. And I feel for most of the people listening to this podcast at this kind of level, certainly they're stuck with us for this long, it's the coagulate part that is in many ways the hard part, because it's relatively straightforward, I think, in the scheme of things to blow up an ego, but it's pretty hard to put it back together in a way that you actually want to inhabit, right? Really, if you think about it, right? If you want to really, one of the terms Jeffrey and I and my friend Colton, former business partner, came up when doing all this non-dual stuff was like, the fundamental question you might end up asking yourself is, how do you live free in an unfree world?
Right.
Something to that effect, right? And then, or how do you reconcile the spirit-matter dichotomy? But in very human terms, how do you live free in an unfree world? How do you live prosperously in an unjust, in an unjust system, or whatever that is? And that's maybe quite a green worldview to see through. It's a little bit like, oh no, woe is me, deconstruction. But there's also a truth in that. And so you kind of do need to drop back into, as you say, into the wonder of the joy of childlike joy and wonder of just like enjoying a sip of water or tea or a butterfly or a cloud or, a cuddle or sex or whatever it is, like almost the baser primitive things, which will just bring you back into, well, what do I have access to in the moment that can give me a sense of joy, right? Breath, body, movement, touch, right. A good conversation, right? And then you don't necessarily need to go into the change the collective, imminent Trump, whatever, Trump, Biden, North Korea. It's just like, whoa, it's all a little out of the, and then you can kind of just bring it right back to the individual. And then you ultimately, not in a bypassing way, but in like in terms of your circle of influence and your circle of concern, you might as well start where you are. Because to go right back to what I said at the start, you can't evolve collective without involving individuals. So you might as well start with yourself, so.
Yep. If you want to change the world, just start with yourself. And if you just change the system, but you don't change the individuals and you change the inside, then you're just replacing the same thing. And then you have stuff like the French Inquisition.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. That's very, very good point. Otherwise, the system will just revert back to exactly how it was, because the interior world of the people will just create the same exterior reality. So there's no point in many ways trying to change an external system without changing it. And to go back to your law point, as I said, I studied law for a few years, and I suppose you did too. And it's like, you think that law changes behavior, but in many ways behavior changes law, right? It's like laws are almost always written like kind of after the fact, where it's like they don't necessarily progress things as much as they do respond to the impetus of people who are kind of pushing up against them. Right. And this is why you get these crazy situations where it's like in Australia, I was the CMO of the not-for-profit that legalized psychedelic assisted therapy. And it's like, yeah, the public was really pushing up against it first and foremost, sort of demanding that these things were legal. And in many ways, a lot of people were just breaking the law and just doing this stuff underground anyway. And so the law will in many ways then try and catch up with people's behavior. And you want to talk about civil rights. I mean, I think, I don't know too much about American civil rights, but didn't Rosa Parks just sit at the front of a bus and that was technically illegal? And she was just like, screw you guys, I'm doing it anyway. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, and then the law had to kind of, then she gets prosecuted, and then the unjustness of the existing laws kind of get called out. So it's like, to your point around interior versus exterior, I mean, law would sit on an integral quadrant in the exterior collective, and values sit on the interior collective. So it's like, which one drove which? Was it like a legal change that drove civil rights, or was it like internal civil value systems, which then had to just drive systemic change, you know?
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's a great point. I love Jesus. I think he was you could say he was like a master of the spiral. I think he both spoke and lived in every stage and showed that to people and related to people in different stages and demonstrated that. And he was a great change maker, but he did it from bottom up, you could say. And I think that's what, like we've been talking about, that's what creates lasting change. And so if you can learn how to embody all the stages within yourself, then people, if you just tell them, they'll be like, I don't get it, or like, this is dumb. But you embody it and you show that, and your energy reflects that, then people will feel it, and they can't, they might reject it, but they can't deny what's there, and it might make them think. And you do, like Jesus said, his high stage, do miraculous things, then ultimately it changes the world in the long run, and that's what we're really looking for.
Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. Jesus as a change maker is such a fascinating story. I mean, I've been looking into it quite hard recently because, I'm Buddhist on my dad's side, Catholic on my mom's. Obviously, grew up in a Christian country, and I still have a lot of Christian values to what it's worth. In many ways, the Integral Alchemy has quite a Christian flavor to it because it doesn't have there's an equanimity and a peacefulness in it, but there's also a almost evangelical, nature to it of like, no, let's get back in the world. Let's stand for something. Let's do that. It's not really just kind of a piecing out scenario, which I think might be my Christian side for better or worse. But Jesus is a change maker. What a fascinating historical example that insofar as that his ministry was only from the age of 30 until 33. Right. That was his age. And then 2,000 years later, we are still on it. A billion people still Catholic alone, And I just think the timelines are so fascinating because Jesus obviously, died crucified 33. And some 600 years later, that became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. That is wild. Can you imagine 600 years or some change, after the death of someone for that to be adopted as a religion? It's absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, that whole element. And geez, this maybe needs to be another podcast because dying for a cause.
Right.
I mean, damn. I mean, he went full self-transcendent, but almost through the red meme. You know what I mean? So there's. I mean, you're right. If you want to get into
so much power, you realize your power is in surrender, and you're more than your body.
Yeah, and then you see this reflected in so much of what's the other most enduring story we have? Star Wars, right? And that incredible Obi-Wan quote, strike me down and I'll become so much more than I am, or something to that effect, right? And it's like, you know what I mean? This same Christ consciousness, Jesus metaphors of like, take me out of material form, I'll become something immaterial. Yeah, there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that one.
Yeah. That's in Buddhism too,
Yeah. Play the devil's advocate here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of Buddhism as well.
Oh, cool. Oh, good for you. Yeah. Who knows if they met hanging out back in the day?
Yeah. This was really great. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to add?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, if you like this, I'll just do my shameless plug, my Orange Mean plug for my course.
Yes.
If you're into this, go integralalchemy.com.au, advancing Australian spiritual knowledge with the .au there. But yeah, integralalchemy.com.au. If you're interested in this stuff, I think you'll enjoy this, and you can have more interesting conversations with Kendall and I about this when you join.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the podcast notes so people can see that. I looked into it and did the beginning starter kit, and it was really great, really awesome. And Gavin does a great job of breaking it down, and yeah, I think it's a great program.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. I was stoked when you went through it. I was like, oh, this guy's a spiral wizard himself, and he's going through this. I need to get his feedback. And so when you were like, yeah, man, you nailed it, I was like, thanks, Kendall. I appreciate that. Man, that's good to hear. It's tough stuff to cover, tough to teach. I think I do a better job in that little podcast than I do, not a better job in that starter kit than I potentially did here, because I've edited that 5,000 times or recorded it to get it dense.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. It's hard to break it down and put in a little bite-sized piece. So here's a little basic bite-sized piece, and then if you want more in depth, then you can go look at the course as well. But yeah, I think you did a great job today.
Oh, thank you.
For the time we had, and I really enjoyed it. Great conversation, and there's really endless paths and places you can go with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, archetypes is another good one we can get into next. I think that's really interesting. So thank you for having me. Thanks for doing this podcast. As I said, I'm very impressed you've done so many of these consecutively. That takes a lot of discipline, so good for you, man. That's great to see.